This is a sponsored video!
Power makes your Overland trips so much easier and more comfortable. And in today's video, we'll be testing out this battery pack with some of the things you might want to take with you and some things that you might not. This is the Anker 757 Powerhouse, and there are three things that attracted me to this battery in particular. One, I've been using Anker products for years. The video files on the video that you're watching right now are actually transferred using an Anker dock from my MacBook. Two, it has a lithium iron phosphate battery. And three, this battery comes with something called Hyper Flash super fast charging. And we'll go into more detail on the battery and the charging technology and what that means for you in a minute. But first, let's take a look at the general design. This battery pack is 11.5 inches tall, 9.5 inches deep, and 18 inches wide at the widest point, which is the handles here at the top. The total weight of the unit is 44 pounds, so it's not light, but it's also not the worst that I've seen. And the handles on the top here actually make it easy to move around. I like that the case has a flat top because it makes for easy packing in a vehicle, since you can stack stuff up on top of it if it's necessary. On the front, we have a ton of ports. There are actually 13 in total. 4 of them are USB-A, there are 2 USB-C, you have a 12-volt output, and there are 6 AC plugs. In terms of the actual power that it'll put out, the USB-Cs are very useful for charging bigger things like laptops and drones, or I don't know, a Nintendo Switch, because the top one has 100 watts of power out, and then the one underneath it is 60 watts. The 12-volt cigarette lighter outlet will put out up to 120 watts, so that's going to be plenty for things like fridges, diesel heaters, and pretty much anything else you'd want to run off 12 volts. And then finally you have the AC outputs, which have a total altogether output of 1500 watts, and we'll test that out later. Something that's worth noting is that there is a physical button for each of these outputs for turning them on and turning them off. Some of the other battery packs that I've seen and have tested use the screens at the top, but the buttons are just a more reliable method for controlling them. The screen itself is big and bright, so it's easy to see in the sun. It includes useful information, things like the remaining battery percentage, which is kind of obvious, but you also have the inputs and the outputs that are being used, as well as an estimate on how long it'll take to either charge up or completely discharge, and we'll be using that later as well. Next to the screen, you have the power saving switch. When that's on, it will actually automatically shut off the battery when it's no longer in use. That way, if you want to leave something charging on there overnight, like a MacBook or other laptop, this will shut off once it's fully charged. The final thing that's worth mentioning is the LED strip on the front here. This whole strip lights up, providing a nice ambient light, which is great when you're sitting in a tent or setting things to charge in the back of your vehicle at night. Now let's talk about the battery itself. The capacity of this is 1,229 watt hours, which is about the equivalent of a 100 amp hour 12-volt battery. The thing that sets this apart from something like Jackery or Goal Zero is the chemistry of what's inside, the chemistry of the lithium battery. This one is lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, where most others, like the Jackery, the Goal Zero, bunch of them, are lithium nickel manganese cobalt, or LNMC. And right now, you probably tuned out, it just sounds like I'm listing a bunch of elements off to you, but there are essentially two differences that matter to us: the weight and the lifespan. Now, the downside to LFP, like this one, is that it is slightly heavier. That's why this one is 44 pounds. The equivalent on the other batteries are going to be a little bit lighter because it's a little more energy dense. The upside is that this has a significantly longer life. While batteries like the Jackery and the Goal Zero are rated to around 500 cycles, this is rated to 3,000 cycles. And when you're spending a lot of money on something like this, it's worth having something that's a little bit heavier to have a significantly longer life, something that's going to last 6 times longer. Now, realistically, you are going to get more life out of both chemistries, since that's just the number of cycles you get before the capacity is significantly reduced. You don't just throw your Jackery away at 500 cycles, and you don't just throw this away at 3,000 cycles. But it is nice knowing that this one's going to last 6 times longer, and that it's something that Anker will stand behind. This comes with a 5-year warranty. Now at this stage, I've been throwing numbers and elements at you. We should probably just put it to use and see what it'll run. I think one of the most common uses for this is just going to be charging other devices, which is great for. I've got some of the things I often charge here while I'm out. And we'll start off with the camera that you're actually watching this on, because it is getting a little low. So we'll plug that in. I guess we'll charge up my other camera. So I'll get that plugged in. Gonna plug in my laptop so we can get that going. There we go, that's charging. iPad needs to be charged a little bit because it's USB, so I have to flip it around 5 times. Both the GoPros, those got tiny batteries, so they're constantly being charged. So plug that one in, plug that one in. All right, I'm out of USBs. What else we got? The drone, of course, because I go through drone batteries like crazy. So let's plug that in, we'll get the inverter going. Drone battery is in here, so I'll pull that out. What's that at? It's about 50%. So we'll plug that one in, and then other batteries like the one from my Impact here. This is very similar to the one that I use in my chainsaw, so if you're using a chainsaw or an Impact, then it is very useful to have a way to charge those up. Electric chainsaws are great if you don't already have one. Recommend it, as long as you've got a way to charge it, kind of like this. So we'll plug that in, get that charging as well. Okay, I think I've got everything. Oh no, I didn't plug in my little ebook here. So we'll plug that in as well. Thankfully I've got an extra USB on there. Now that we've got everything plugged in, we can see along the top, we've got those little icons showing us what is plugged in. We can see that we're pulling 101 watts, and most of that's probably the drone battery because those things use a ton of power, and that gives us an 8-hour runtime. Obviously, it's going to end up running a lot longer than that because this drone battery is probably going to be charged in 30 minutes to an hour, and that amount that we're pulling is suddenly going to go down a lot. What we can do is flip that over into eco mode. That way, as this stuff gets charged, it's gonna turn off and the battery itself will shut off to save power once it's done charging everything. I don't actually need all this stuff charged right now, so let's unplug it all and test something else. Another thing that this is going to be commonly used for is running 12-volt fridges, like my little iSco that I have plugged in here. And most of these 12-volt fridges pull between 35 and 50 watts, and the iSco is currently sitting at, it keeps going between about 45 and 50 watts, and based on that, it would run for around 21-ish hours. Of course, no fridge runs constantly. They're cycling on and off as and when they're needed. So even in the hottest weather, a fridge is going to run about half the time. So you're looking at a couple of days of runtime in really hot weather. In more average weather or even cooler weather, this could run a fridge for up to a week, maybe even a little more in cool weather. It all depends on the ambient temperature. First up is a heater blanket, and this is actually how my wife and I keep warm when it's around freezing. We got one of these each. We'll plug them in and we'll leave them on all night. So we'll turn that on and we'll actually crank it up to high. Usually when I'm using these, I don't need to leave them on high, but we'll let this warm up for a couple of minutes. We'll come back and see how long it's going to last. All right, we have let this warm up. It is really quite toasty now, which feels so wrong because it's like 95 degrees outside. But with it on high, we are pulling a little over 30 watts, about 32 watts. And according to the little information screen here, that means it'll run this heated blanket for a little over 16 hours, which means you can actually run 2 of these overnight on high and keep you and someone else warm, like my wife and I are warm. Realistically, when we're using these, we never have them on high all night long. We usually turn them down to low once we've warmed up, and we found that this actually easily runs both heated blankets all night long. Of course, right now it is, 95 degrees outside, so we probably don't need a heated blanket. What we would want instead is air conditioning, and that is something that I get asked more than anything else. So let's test out some air conditioning with this. I had to clear off a little bit more space for this. This is the Zero Breeze Mark II little portable camping air conditioning unit. Now I could try plugging in like a window unit or a portable AC unit into this, but it's not going to run it. Those are high power use and really just too big to take anywhere, whereas this one's obviously designed for camping. So let's plug it in and we will see how it does. So turn it on there, and then something's happening over here. Let's turn it up to max because we can. So we've given it a few minutes and it has definitely, it's warmed up. I got hot air coming out the exhaust and cold air coming out the output, and it is pulling about 130 watts. So you're looking at about 7 hours of runtime with the air conditioning on max. When it's hot, I personally prefer to use a small USB fan, and I would plug those in and show you them, but they're currently sitting in my truck, which is in Seattle, waiting for Overland Expo Pacific Northwest. But I do know that they would just run for weeks on this. What I have instead is just a normal sized fan that we're gonna plug in and test out, and actually having one of these in the tent would be really nice because this is a lot more powerful than my little USB ones. So we'll plug it in, start it up, and see how long it lasts. I'm sure it'll last the night easily. We are pulling 22 watts, which means we could run this fan for 21 hours. Believe it or not, I have actually used one of these. In fact, this exact one on a trip. We bought this from Harbor Freight while we were out for like, I don't know, $6 or $7. I don't have my safety goggles. Well, it pulls about 200 and something watts, which is obviously the most we've pulled yet, but had no issues at all. I don't see anyone using something like this out on a trip, but you know, if you've got to cut something up in your backyard, it'd be nice to have. So that pulled 500 watts. Let's try something bigger. I guess this could be useful if you wanted to vacuum your truck out while it's in your driveway. I don't know, I'm kind of stretching now, but I want to find something that it won't run. Well, that pulled 1,000 watts, but it still ran it. I don't know what to try now. What if you were vacuuming while cutting with the circular saw? Okay, how about you're vacuuming while using the circular saw and it's really hot, so you want the air conditioning. All right, this, a heat gun, will definitely do it because by itself, it pulls about 1,200 watts. What the heck? Okay, there it goes. I was gonna say, I thought this was a 1,500 watt inverter and it's pulling like 2,200. All right, so we finally tripped it. It beeps, it stops, it turns off. A couple of other things that I don't have with me, but I know it will run, are CPAP machines and Starlink, both of which will run for around 24 hours. If I didn't test something out and you want to know how long it'll last, you just divide the 1,229 watt hours by the number of watts that your device uses, and you'll be left with the number of hours that it will run. If you want to know something that runs off the AC power, then you divide 983 watt hours instead, and that allows for the inefficiencies of running off the inverter. Of course, this isn't something that you have to exclusively use for camping. Last year in Kentucky, we had a major ice storm that knocked out power to a ton of people. And of course, anyone who lives near the Gulf Coast or the East Coast knows how important it is having backup power. This thing will run your fridge, or it'll let you cook food when the power is out. With the kitchen fridge plugged in, we're pulling between 50 and 60 watts, which gives us about 13 or a little over 13 hours of runtime while the fridge is actually running, while the compressor's running in the fridge. Just like the 12 volt fridge though, this thing's gonna cycle as and when it's needed. You know, it's not gonna run the whole time. So it could end up being significantly longer than that. Just kind of depends on the ambient temperature again. Either way, it's gonna be enough to see through some short power outages and keep all your food safe. Now we're going to try some common kitchen appliances, and yeah, all of these things will be useful if the power's out at home, but I actually have seen people take this kind of stuff, or heard of people who want to take this kind of stuff camping. People who actually take a microwave. I know someone who takes an Instapot. So we'll test them out and see how they do with the battery. We will start with the microwave just because that's the easiest thing for me to plug in with the extension cord that I've got here, and see how it does. So today on my fancy cooking show, we're going to be heating up Pop-Tarts. Oh, first I've got to set the clock. Yeah, so it's pulling about 1400 watts. It's cooking it just fine. It's going to be a very hot Pop-Tart unless I stop it. But what if you prefer your Pop-Tart toasted? It's toasting it just fine. You're pulling about 700 watts. All right, we'll set the griddle to maximum temperature. So if you want to cook pancakes while you're out there, again, it's doing it. It's warming up. You've got 1200 watts. Now, I know a lot of people are going to want me to test out one of those instant coffee makers like a Keurig. I don't own one though, so I can't. But I do have a kettle, an electric kettle. If it'll boil water in this, it'll make coffee in a Keurig. So we'll turn that on, leave it running for a couple of minutes. Looks like it's pulling 1200 watts, running just fine, but we'll leave it running and see if it boils the water. The kettle boiled the water with no issue at all. I ended up using a few percent, so I've charged the battery back up to 100%, ready to try out the Instapot. Because what I want to do here is set this to go for, well, I'm going to set it for 45 minutes, but I'm going to check back in about 30 and we'll see how much power it has used. Because from what I understand, it's like 20 to 30 minutes to cook a meal with the Instapot. So leave this go and come back. I ended up leaving the Instapot on for its full cycle, so it took about 10 minutes for it to warm up or get to pressure, and then I let it keep cooking for 45 minutes. And with 45 minutes of cook time, it used 20% of the battery. So I'm comfortable that you can cook whatever needs cooking in this. When I'm not out on my trips, I actually plan to use this as a power backup for my editing setup. Because it supports pass-through charging, I can plug in my computer and monitors into it, and if the power ever goes out while I'm editing, I won't lose all my progress. Now that we've talked about what it can be used for, we probably need to talk about how we're going to charge it up again. There are three options. Even though it's slowest, the 12-volt charger will charge this at about 120 watts, which is the fastest of any battery that I've tested. The MPPT solar input will work with any solar panels between 11 and 30 volts with the XT60 connector, and it accepts up to 300 watts of solar. The 120 volt AC charging will charge at 1000 watts, and that's really what sets this battery apart from the others. This is the fastest charging battery that I've ever used. With the 1000 watt input, you can actually go from 0 to 80% charge in an hour. When I got this, it was at 32%, plugged it in, and 45 minutes later, it was fully charged. If you're going to be using this for something that draws a lot of power overnight, something like heated blankets all night long, my recommendation would be that you use an inverter in your vehicle that can handle the 1000 watt charging while you're driving. That way you can charge this up really quickly while you're traveling and you never have to worry about it running out. Hopefully you found this overview helpful in choosing a battery for your camping and your overland trips. If you're still unsure and think that maybe this might be too big or too much capacity for you, check out the smaller Anker 521 and 535, both of which also have the lithium iron phosphate batteries that you see in this one. I'll put links to all three of them in the description. Thanks for watching.